The story begins on a quiet frontier colony where life usually moves slowly. People wake up early, handle their work, and return home before the sun sets behind the dusty hills. Nothing dramatic ever happens there. That is why the day the patrol team found a crashed shuttle in the ashen wastes felt so unreal. Most days, the wastes are empty, only sand, wind, and old broken metals from past storms. But that morning, when two patrol officers noticed a trail of smoke curling into the sky, they followed it with caution, expecting to find another burnt-out mining machine or a malfunctioning cargo drone. Instead, they discovered a small silver craft half buried in the sand, still warm from re-entry. It didn't match any model registered in the colony's database. The metal looked scorched, and strange symbols were etched along its sides, symbols that none of the officers recognized. They approached slowly, expecting alarms or flames, but the shuttle remained completely silent. The door was jammed halfway open, and from inside came the faint sound of breathing steady, calm, as if whoever was inside wasn't afraid at all. The patrol officers exchanged a look. People didn't usually survive crashes out here. The wastes weren't forgiving. The heat alone could finish someone in minutes if they weren't prepared. And yet, when they finally managed to pry open the door, they found a young girl sitting inside, awake, alert, and staring at them with eyes that seemed too steady for someone who had just fallen out of the sky. She didn't cry, didn't ask for help, didn't even look confused. She simply watched them, like she had already taken in every detail of her surroundings, and was waiting for them to make the next move. They helped her out gently. She didn't struggle or speak. She just stepped onto the sand and stood there, looking at the huge open desert like she had lived through far worse places. Her clothes were torn but crafted from some material the officers had never seen before, thick but flexible, decorated with tiny marks that looked almost like survival notes or personal symbols. She had small scars on her arms, but they didn't look like injuries from the crash. They looked older, like marks from a hard life on an even harder world. They took her back to the colony's outpost, where medics and technicians waited. The moment the scans finished, confusion spread across the room. Her biology didn't match any species listed in the colony registry. A quiet murmur passed among the staff. She's from a Deathworld. A Deathworld was the kind of planet most people only heard about in training videos worlds filled with dangerous weather, deadly wildlife, and harsh landscapes where only the strongest life forms could survive. Even grown adults from such planets had reputations that made soldiers nervous. But this girl looked young, far too young to have lived through the dangers her home world was known for. Yet she carried herself like someone who had survived more than most adults ever would. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes missed nothing. Every movement around her, every sound, every shadow, she tracked all of it. When they tried speaking to her, she didn't answer. She didn't seem angry or scared. She just seemed reserved, observing, listening. She understood the words. The staff could tell, but she chose silence. Her calmness wasn't the calmness of someone who trusted her surroundings. It was the calmness of someone who didn't fear them. The colony officers decided she needed to be taken to a proper research facility, a place with trained specialists who could figure out where she came from, what she needed, and whether she posed any risk, not because she had done anything wrong, but because Deathworlders had unpredictable survival instincts. Even in peaceful settings, the reflexes could be sharper and faster than what people were used to. The staff wanted to protect her, but they also wanted to protect themselves in case something unexpected happened. During the transport to the facility, she sat quietly in the corner of the carrier, her gaze fixed on the landscape passing by. The crew kept checking on her, offering water, food, blankets, anything to make her comfortable. She accepted the water with a small nod, but refused everything else, not out of defiance, but more like she was simply used to going without. She kept watching the officers carefully, studying the way they moved, how they talked, how they handled equipment. One officer whispered, "It's like she's memorizing the whole place." By the time they reached the research facility, the news had already spread. Staff from different wings gathered just to catch a glimpse of the mysterious girl, now known only as the Deathworlder child. She didn't react to the attention. She didn't hide or seek comfort. She just walked alongside the officers, her steps light and controlled, as if she was measuring the distance of every hallway, every door, every camera she passed. When they placed her in a temporary observation room, she sat on the simple bed, folded her hands in her lap, and remained still. She didn't pace or fidget. She didn't test the walls or the equipment. It was almost as if she was waiting to understand the rules of this new place before deciding how to behave. The researchers watched through the observation window. One of them murmured, "She's not reacting like a lost child. She's reacting like someone evaluating us." They ran gentle behavioral tests, nothing harmful, nothing stressful. They checked her reflex response to simple lights and sounds and recorded her ability to follow patterns. Each time, she did the tasks perfectly, almost too perfectly. She didn't hesitate. She didn't question instructions. She simply performed them in the fastest, cleanest way possible. It wasn't robotic, it was practiced, like she had been trained for this kind of assessment since she was small. But what unsettled the staff even more was her emotional control. Even when equipment buzzed suddenly, or when a loud alarm from another room went off by accident, she didn't flinch. Her breathing stayed slow and steady. Fear didn't seem to touch her at all. At night, when the lights dimmed and the facility grew quiet, she sat by the small window in her room and watched the stars outside. The guards noticed she barely slept, maybe only a few minutes at a time, yet she never looked tired. She seemed to rest with her eyes open, listening to the hum of the machines around her. No one could tell what she was thinking, but she didn't appear sad or frightened. She looked curious, patient, and strangely wise for her age. The facility leaders eventually held a meeting. They respected that she was a child, but her abilities and her background raised serious questions. Was she in danger? Did she need protection? Was she trying to reach someone? And most importantly, how should they understand someone who came from a world built on extreme survival? After hours of discussion, they agreed to initiate a standard evaluation protocol, not a harsh one, just a controlled environment where they could observe her natural instincts more clearly. They wanted to understand her reflexes, her comfort levels, and how she reacted under mild pressure. The goal was not to frighten her, but to ensure they knew how to help her safely. While they prepared, the girl continued her quiet routine, eating very little, speaking not at all, studying everything around her. When a researcher accidentally dropped a tool on the floor, she caught it before it hit the ground, her hand moving faster than anyone expected. She didn't make a big deal of it. She simply handed the tool back gently. Moments like that made everyone realize she wasn't dangerous by choice. She was simply built for a world far tougher than their own. But no one yet understood just how skilled she truly was. The evaluation protocol scheduled for the next day would be the moment that changed everything. The next morning at the facility felt different. Everyone moved quietly, speaking in low voices, even though nothing dangerous was happening. It was simply the feeling that something unusual was about to begin. The staff didn't fear the girl exactly, but they all respected the unknown around her. She sat on the edge of her small bed, already awake when the first guard arrived. She always woke early. No alarm, no noise. She just opened her eyes, like she had been alert the whole night. When the guard entered her room to bring a meal tray, she turned her head slightly and gave a small nod, acknowledging him. She rarely showed emotion, but she understood politeness. She didn't eat much, only a few bites, as if she was used to conserving everything. Sometimes the staff wondered if she had ever lived in a place where food was scarce or unpredictable. She never complained. She just adjusted. The facility wasn't a prison. It was clean, bright, and safe. The staff tried to be gentle with her, moving slowly, giving her space. They wanted her to feel comfortable before the evaluation began. The plan for the day was simple. Place her in a large, testing chamber to observe her reactions to different environmental setups. Nothing dangerous, nothing stressful. Mostly lights, sounds, obstacle layouts, and simple problem-solving tasks. The girl didn't know the full details, but she sensed something was being prepared. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the courtyard below. Workers walked across the open area carrying equipment. Technicians adjusted screens and sensors. She wasn't nervous. She was curious. Her eyes followed every small movement, studying how people talked to each other, how they held their tools, how they prepared the testing space. Not one of the researchers stood behind the observation glass and whispered, "She notices everything, even the things we don't think about." Another replied, "She's not reacting like someone trapped. She's reacting like someone analyzing." When the time came, 2 guards gently guided her down the hall. The girl walked calmly, not rushing, not hesitating. She kept her hands relaxed at her sides. She didn't touch the walls or peek through doors like most children might. She simply followed the path, almost as if she already memorized it from sound alone. The hallways were quiet except for the hum of machines. The girl listened to every sound, the clicking of the lights overhead, the soft echo of footsteps, the air vents blowing cool air. Each detail layered in her mind. She wasn't afraid. She was preparing. They arrived at the testing chamber, a large space with soft flooring, a few low barriers, sensor panels, and moving platforms. The room looked more like an indoor training area than anything threatening. There were no weapons, no sharp objects, nothing unsafe. The purpose was simply to understand how a Deathworld child moved and reacted in a structured environment. The lead researcher stood near the entrance and greeted her with a polite tone. The girl looked at him quietly, then stepped into the chamber. She didn't ask questions, but her eyes traveled across the entire room in a slow, sweeping arc. She took in every detail. The corners, the height of the walls, the small holes where cameras were hidden, the faint lines on the floor that marked sensor zones. She wasn't frightened by the unfamiliar setup. If anything, she seemed relieved to be somewhere open after staying in a small room for several days. The door closed softly behind her. She didn't react to the sound. Instead, she walked to the center of the room and stood still, waiting for whatever came next. It wasn't the waiting of someone unsure. It was the waiting of someone patient. In the control room, the staff watched through a large screen. One technician adjusted his headset and said, "All right, let's start with the basic pattern test." The lights in the chamber shifted to a gentle glow. A soft tone played, and colorful circles appeared on the floor. The girl looked down, studying the colors. When a circle lit up brighter than the others, she stepped onto it. The lights shifted again, faster this time, and she matched every pattern perfectly, stepping in flawless rhythm, no hesitation, no confusion. Her movements were smooth, almost graceful, as if she had practiced similar exercises before. The staff exchanged astonished glances. Even adults struggled with pattern tests when the pace increased, yet the girl adapted immediately. They changed the task. The lights turned off for a moment, then turned back on with a layout of small obstacles, low walls, and movable blocks. A set of chimes played in a sequence, and she seemed to understand the task without being told. She walked through the layout, touching the blocks that matched the tones she had heard. She didn't bump into anything. She didn't misstep. It was like her sense of space stretched out several feet around her. One guard, watching from the side, whispered, "It's like she can feel the whole room." Another replied, "She's more aware than any child I've seen." They continued with different tasks, tracking slow-moving lights along the floor, tossing soft objects into targets, following gentle vibrations from the floor panels. Each time, she performed better than expected. Her reactions were not extreme or aggressive. They were thoughtful, controlled, and precise. But the moment that unsettled the staff the most was when a mechanical platform accidentally shifted out of sync. It wasn't part of the task. It was a minor technical error. The platform moved suddenly, causing one of the obstacles to tip slightly. Most children would jump or cry out in surprise. The girl didn't. She simply stepped back calmly, letting the object settle on its own. She didn't even blink. The technician apologized over the intercom, but the girl showed no sign of distress. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, almost as if she could hear the machine's internal rhythm and understood it wasn't a threat. The evaluation continued for over an hour. At no point did she show exhaustion or frustration. She moved like someone who had grown up adapting to unpredictable surroundings. The staff realized that if she truly came from a death world, then this room, safe, clean, and controlled, was probably the easiest environment she had ever been in. Between tasks, she sometimes looked up at the observation glass. She didn't stare with anger or suspicion. It was more like she was waiting for the next instruction, ready to cooperate as long as she understood what was expected. There was something almost peaceful about her. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't showing off. She was simply being herself. During a short break, the staff tried one more test, measuring her reaction time to gentle sound cues. When a soft bell rang, she touched a panel. When a low buzzing hummed, she touched a different one. Her hands moved quickly, but not in a frantic way. It was like she had learned to trust her senses more than most humans did. She could pick out the tiniest difference between tones. After almost 2 hours of steady observation, the staff decided to end the session. They didn't want to push her too far, and she had already shown more than enough for one day. The lights returned to their normal brightness. The door opened. 2 guards stepped inside slowly, making sure not to startle her. She turned toward them right away. She didn't look tired, even though she had been moving nonstop. She walked toward them without hesitation. When she reached them, she looked up as if waiting for further instruction. Her expression remained calm, no fear, no worry, just quiet readiness. On the way back to her room, she walked the same slow, steady pace as before. The guards didn't need to hold her hand or guide her. She already remembered the entire path. When she reached her door, she paused for a moment, looking down the hallway behind her. The guards noticed, but they didn't understand what she was thinking. She wasn't trying to escape. Her face didn't show any sign of planning something. It was more like she was studying the place she now lived in, trying to understand her new world one hallway at a time. Back in her room, she sat on the bed again. Her breathing was steady. She showed no signs of stress from the evaluation. She rested her hands in her lap and looked at the floor with a thoughtful expression. Maybe she was wondering why these tests mattered. Maybe she was thinking about her home world. Maybe she was simply observing the patterns in the facility's evening lights. In the observation room, the staff discussed the results. They were impressed, but they were also confused. Her abilities didn't match her age. Her calmness didn't match her situation. One researcher said softly, "She isn't dangerous, but she's different in a way we've never studied before." Another answered, "She's been trained," or life trained her. What none of them knew yet was that these simple tests were only the beginning. They had glimpsed her patience, her awareness, her calm instinct. But they had not yet seen the depth of her survival skills. They thought they understood her. They believed the evaluation would prepare them for what she could do. But the real test, the moment that would change the entire facility, was still waiting. The next day began almost normally at the facility. But everyone felt a quiet tension under the surface. People walked faster, spoke more carefully, and kept glancing at the screens that showed the testing chamber. Even though the evaluation the previous day had gone smoothly, the staff still didn't fully understand the girl. She had passed every test calmly and naturally, but her ability to adjust to new challenges so quickly made people unsure how she might react when things became more complicated. The plan for the day was different from the first evaluation. The staff wanted to observe how she interacted with other people in a controlled environment. Not real danger, not real conflict, just staged scenarios meant to understand her instincts around physical contact and group movement. Everything was designed to be safe. Soft walls, padded floors, and trained personnel whose job was not to fight, but to test coordination and teamwork. Nothing intense, nothing harmful. Before the session began, the girl sat quietly on her bed again, staring at the small light on the ceiling. She listened to the footsteps outside her room and the clicking of machines turning on for the morning. She already recognized the routine. Every sound in the facility followed a pattern, and she had memorized most of them. When the guard opened the door, she stood up without being asked. She always understood the rhythm of the day, even though no one explained it to her. The guard motioned politely for her to follow, and she did. She didn't rush. Her footsteps were soft and measured. She always moved with quiet balance, like someone who had grown up walking across uneven ground. As she walked down the hallway, the staff on duty watched her with interest. She didn't look lost. She didn't cling to anyone for comfort. She walked like she belonged there, even though she had arrived only days ago. Her calmness still puzzled everyone. When they reached the testing chamber, the girl paused for a moment at the doorway. The room looked slightly different from yesterday. The barriers were placed in new positions, and soft platforms stood in different corners. She noticed everything instantly. Her eyes swept across the space, and then she stepped inside. The door closed behind her, gently. In the control room above, the staff prepared for the evaluation. Today's goal was simple: observe how she reacts to fast movement in teamwork situations. The people entering the room with her were trained specialists whose job was to create harmless, controlled scenarios almost like simple games. They wore soft protective gear, not to protect themselves from her, but to prevent accidental bumps or falls. The first group of 3 specialists entered the chamber. Their instructions were short: approach her slowly, guide her through a cooperative task involving moving objects across the room, and observe how she responds. The girl turned to look at them as soon as they stepped inside. She didn't frown or step back. She just watched their posture carefully. She studied the angle of their shoulders, the distance of their steps, the weight of each footfall. She didn't know the purpose of the exercise yet, but she understood that these people intended no harm. One specialist lifted a soft block and placed it on a platform. Then he pointed to another block on the floor and gestured gently for her to bring it. The girl walked over, picked it up, and carried it to him. She didn't throw it, didn't rush it. She placed it quietly on the platform. They repeated this process, each time with a different pattern. The girl learned each pattern faster than expected. When the specialists tried to switch tasks suddenly, she adapted instantly, adjusting her movements as if she had already predicted the change. The staff watching from above took notes. One whispered, "Her brain must process movement faster than ours." Another replied softly, "It's not just speed. She understands intention before it becomes action." Things changed when a second group of specialists entered the room. The purpose was not to overwhelm her, but to see whether she could work within a crowd. The staff wanted to observe how she responded to multiple people moving around her at the same time. The moment the door opened again, the girl looked toward it, not startled, but alert. She adjusted her stance slightly, becoming more balanced, more centered. Not defensive, just prepared. The specialists spread out around the room in a slow, non-threatening way. They moved like people in a training exercise, carefully, calmly, making sure not to frighten her. The girl watched them for a few seconds, and adjusted her path around them with smooth steps. She never bumped into anyone. She didn't hesitate. She simply shifted her shoulders, tilted her head, and changed her direction with a natural fluidity that surprised everyone. The specialists began a task where they had to guide objects across a shifting platform. The girl helped without needing much explanation. She seemed to understand the task even before the specialists finished showing her. She moved objects to the right place before they asked. Her timing was perfect. Her accuracy was precise. But what shocked the staff wasn't what she did, it was how she did it. She never pushed, never pulled, never showed impatience. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, almost like she had grown up handling situations where the environment changed constantly. On a death world, maybe children had to adapt quickly to survive unpredictable events. Midway through the hour, the testing panel for the platforms malfunctioned slightly. The platforms began to shift a bit faster and not according to the planned sequence. It wasn't dangerous, just unpredictable. But because it wasn't part of the script, the specialists hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to continue or step back. The girl didn't hesitate. She adjusted immediately, stepping onto the stable base before the platform shifted again. She moved one specialist gently out of the way, not forcefully, just enough to guide him from the edge. Her movement was so natural and so smooth that the specialist didn't even realize she had repositioned him until he looked down and saw his feet unstable. Ground. The staff watching blinked at the screen. She corrected for the malfunction. Someone whispered, and she did it without alarming anyone. Another added. The specialists continued the exercise, now feeling almost like they were following her instead of guiding her. She seemed to sense the vibrations of the moving platforms before they shifted. She stepped lightly, choosing the safest path with no hesitation. When someone accidentally dropped a soft container, she caught it reflexively before it could roll away, handing it back with a calm expression. By the end of the first hour, the specialist stepped back to signal a pause. The girl stopped moving immediately and stood still in the center of the room, breathing evenly. She weren't tired. Her rhythm remained constant. The specialists exited quietly. Once the door closed, the technician in the control room noted the time and whispered, "That's 8 specialists she helped guide through tasks." Someone else added, "And she didn't misunderstand a single signal. Zero confusion." But the most surprising part came a moment later. Instead of sitting on the floor or wandering the room during the break, the girl slowly walked to one corner specifically, where one of the hidden sensors was located. She crouched down and examined the wall, not touching it, just studying the faint buzz of the machinery behind it. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the frequency. That moment made the staff shift uneasily. She wasn't just reacting to the environment. She was learning it. When the intercom gently told her the break was over, she stood immediately and returned to the center of the room, ready for whatever came next. She showed no frustration, no boredom, only patience. In the control room, the facility staff shared quiet looks. What they had seen was not aggression, not danger, but a kind of awareness they had never studied before. They weren't dealing with a frightened child. They were dealing with someone shaped by a world where survival demanded sharp senses and quick thinking. One researcher finally said, "If she's this calm with 8 trained adults in the room, what does actual stress look like for her?" No one had an answer, and none of them yet understood that the next part of the evaluation planned for the following day would make every guard in the facility question whether they were prepared for someone like her. The morning of the next evaluation felt different from the previous days, and almost everyone could feel it. Even the workers who usually joked during breakfast stayed quiet, talking only in soft, short sentences. The air inside the facility had a strange weight to it, as if everyone shared the same unspoken thought. Today might reveal something none of them were fully prepared to understand. The girl, like always, was awake before anyone checked on her. She sat on the floor instead of the bed, her legs crossed and her back straight. She wasn't meditating or resting. Her eyes moved slowly from one corner of the room to another, as if she could sense the smallest vibrations in the walls and the faint hum of the lights above her. She looked calm, but in a way that made people wonder what her mind was doing behind that quiet expression. When the guard opened the door, she stood up gently. The guard greeted her with a polite nod. She nodded back. She didn't smile, but she didn't look upset either. She simply followed him out of the room without being told what to do. She always seemed to know when it was time to begin something new. This time, instead of taking her directly to the testing chamber, the guard led her through a different hallway. She noticed immediately. Her eyes scanned the walls, the lights, the curves of the ceiling. She recognized that this hallway had fewer windows and more doors with warning labels. She wasn't scared, only curious. She walked with the same soft, steady steps she always used as they approached the entrance of the chamber. Several guards stood nearby, speaking in low, serious voices. The moment they saw her, they straightened, pretending everything was normal. But she sensed the shift in their energy. Their shoulders looked tense. Their breathing was heavier than usual. Even the way they held their equipment felt different. She didn't know why, but she could tell something about today mattered more to them than before. Inside the control room, the leaders of the facility watched through the thick glass window. They had discussed things for hours the night before. Everyone agreed that the girl's abilities were impressive, almost unbelievable, but they still didn't know her limits, her instincts, or how she would react in more complex situations. They weren't looking for aggression. They wanted understanding. But they also knew that today's test involved more movement, more coordination, and more people. They wanted to see how she behaved when the environment became unpredictable. When she stepped into the chamber, she immediately noticed that the room was much larger than before. The walls were higher, and the space was divided into several sections with soft barriers. There were no sharp edges or dangerous tools, just a bigger area with places to move around freely. She took a few steps forward, examining the new layout. Her eyes moved from floor to ceiling, tracing every shape and listening to every soft, mechanical sound. The door closed behind her with a gentle click. For a long moment, she stood completely still in the center of the chamber. She listened. From above, she could hear the faint murmuring of people watching her. Their voices were too quiet to understand, but their tone told her enough. They were uncertain. Then, the first group entered. They weren't guards. They were trained evaluation staff, dressed lightly, carrying nothing except small devices that displayed lights and patterns. Their job was simple: approach her calmly, guide her through tasks, and observe how she reacted in situations requiring quick decision-making. She watched them approach, studying their pace and posture. She didn't tense. She didn't step back. She just observed with that steady gaze of hers. When the lead evaluator gestured politely toward a sensor panel on the wall, she walked to it without hesitation. She placed her hand on the panel, and a soft light spread across the chamber floor Like a slow pulse dot, it was the start of the test. Colored shapes appeared across the room, and she had to move between them before the lights faded. The shapes were spaced far apart, requiring quick movement. But she didn't run. She moved with quiet speed, smooth, controlled, almost like dancing. She reached every shape without making a single mistake. Even when they switched positions suddenly, the evaluators looked at each other with wide eyes. One whispered under his breath. She knew where the next shape would appear before it appeared. Another replied quietly, or she reacted faster than we could see. But nothing she did was wild or threatening. Her movements were soft, gentle, almost elegant. She touched every panel with care, never slamming, never rushing. Then came the next part of the evaluation, multiple evaluators moving around her at once, each performing different patterns. They weren't trying to block her or confuse her. They were simply testing how she navigated changing human movement. The moment they began, she adjusted instantly. She didn't bump into anyone. She didn't hesitate. She shifted her shoulders and stepped sideways with fluid timing, always choosing the path with the most space. Even when two evaluators accidentally moved too close to her at the same time, she simply rotated her body slightly and continued without losing her rhythm. The entire control room fell silent. They weren't witnessing aggression. They were witnessing awareness so sharp that it felt almost unnatural. Yet there was nothing dangerous about her behavior. She looked calm, almost peaceful, as she moved around the room like flowing water. Halfway through the hour, something unexpected happened. A small platform in the back of the chamber flickered. It wasn't part of the test. A loose wire had caused the lift mechanism to shake slightly. The sound was sudden, a hollow metallic click that echoed across the chamber. One evaluator flinched at the noise. The girl didn't. She turned her head, listened carefully, and then stepped further away from the unstable platform without needing a warning. Her reaction wasn't fear. It was instinct. She simply understood which things were safe and which things required distance. The evaluators continued the task, impressed by her calm judgment. A few minutes later, when the lights changed again, she was expected to walk across an area with shifting floor panels. These panels rose and fell slowly, creating uneven ground. Most children would move nervously across them, unsure of how much weight to place on each step. She didn't. She stepped onto the first panel, waited for the slightest vibration, and then moved exactly when the panel was most stable. She didn't misjudge even once. She didn't trip, didn't stumble, didn't even wobble. She made the entire sequence look effortless. In the control room, someone whispered, "She's adapting to the timing faster than the sensors." Someone else answered, "She understands patterns we didn't even explain." By the time the first hour ended, 8 trained evaluators had worked with her. Not one of them looked stressed or scared. Instead, they seemed stunned by her coordination. They talked quietly among themselves. When they stepped out of the chamber, "She guided me without touching me," one said. "She moved before I even realized I was in her way." Another added, "She wasn't reacting to us. She was anticipating us." But everything changed when the facility leaders asked for one more round. The evaluation wasn't dangerous, but it involved quicker movement, faster reflexes, and more complex patterns. The evaluators hadn't prepared for this much activity in a single day, and though none of them said it aloud, they all felt a subtle pressure. They respected the girl deeply now. They admired her, but they also understood that she didn't think or move the way they did. When the call went out for volunteers to enter the chamber for the final round, the room fell completely silent. No one stepped forward, not because they were scared of harm. She had shown nothing but calmness, but because they didn't know how to predict her. They worried they might accidentally disrupt the test, or confuse her, or misread her signals. The idea of standing near someone who could read every movement before you made it was strangely intimidating. A bite, supervisor gently encouraged them, but still no one volunteered. The girl, inside the chamber, waited patiently. She didn't pace. She didn't shake her head. She simply stood in the center, hands by her sides, watching the door as if she could sense hesitation behind it. In the control room, the leaders realized something important. This was not a child who reacted with fear, panic, or frustration. This was a child who changed the behavior of grown professionals simply by existing. Her calmness created uncertainty. Her awareness created pressure. Her silence created mystery. And her presence alone had stopped 8 trained adults from entering a harmless testing chamber. The leaders finally ended the session early. Inside the chamber, the lights dimmed and the door opened slowly. The girl stepped out quietly. She didn't ask why the test had ended. She didn't look disappointed or confused. She simply walked back to her room with the same slow, thoughtful steps she always used. The guards watched her go, their expressions softening. They didn't see her as a threat. They saw her as someone who carried far more life experience than her age should allow. Someone shaped by a world that taught her calmness instead of fear, awareness instead of panic, and quiet strength instead of loud reactions. As she sat back on her bed, she looked at her hands, then at the ceiling, as if thinking deeply about something she couldn't put into words. She had not harmed anyone. She had not broken any rule. She had not resisted or argued, but without meaning to. She had changed everything. And none of the staff guards, evaluators, or leaders knew what tomorrow's session would bring. The next morning began much quieter than usual. Inside the facility, people spoke in calm voices, but there was a deeper level of thought behind their eyes. Everyone was still thinking about the previous day, how the evaluation had ended early, how the staff had hesitated to enter the chamber, and how the girl had reacted with such peaceful acceptance. The girl, however, did not seem unsettled at all. As always, she woke before sunrise. She sat on the bed with her knees drawn up slightly, hands resting softly on her legs. She looked peaceful, but not sleepy. Her eyes stayed half open, as if she was listening to something far away, something no one else could hear. A guard walked toward her door with slow steps. He wasn't nervous, but he wasn't relaxed either. He had seen the way other guards talked the night before, how they whispered about her calmness, her awareness, and how she never needed instructions. Some found it admirable. Some found it confusing. But everyone agreed she was unlike any child they had ever met. When he opened the door, she looked up at him gently. He greeted her with a small nod, the same way he always did. She returned a soft nod, just enough to show she understood it was time to begin the day. As they walked down the hallway, he noticed something new about her. She was looking at the lights overhead as if the brightness or the buzzing hum had changed. Her head tilted slightly every few steps. She wasn't frightened, only curious. She always seemed to be discovering something small that everybody else ignored. When they reached the breakfast area, several staff members stood nearby, pretending not to stare. They tried to act normal, but she could sense the energy around her. It wasn't fear, it was uncertainty. People didn't know what to expect from her, because every day she revealed something new that made them rethink their assumptions. She sat at the table quietly. She didn't rush her food, but she didn't eat slowly either. She paid attention to everything, even the smallest noises, the clinking of trays, the soft conversations happening across the room, the footsteps of workers walking outside the door. One staff member accidentally dropped a cup, and it rolled across the floor with a hollow sound. Before anyone reacted, she turned her head in that direction smoothly, almost before the cup made its second bounce. The worker picked it up quickly, embarrassed. She didn't judge him or stare for long. She simply returned her attention to her meal dot after breakfast. She was taken to a new meeting room instead of the testing chamber. It was a wide room with soft lights, chairs arranged in a circle, and sensors on the walls that glowed faintly. The room felt warm and welcoming, very different from the other evaluation rooms she'd seen. A group of specialists waited for her. They didn't hold devices or clipboards this time. Instead, they sat calmly, hands folded in their laps. Their goal today wasn't to test her coordination or awareness. Today, they wanted to study something else altogether: how she felt when interacting with people in a more natural, social setting. When she entered the room, everyone smiled gently. She paused for a moment. This was new. She wasn't used to being greeted like this. Her eyes moved slowly across each face. She didn't look nervous. She just looked thoughtful, as if she was evaluating their intentions. They gestured toward an empty seat in the circle. She walked over quietly and sat down. The first specialist spoke softly. "We want to talk today," he said. "We want to understand you better. No tests, no running around. Just conversation." She didn't respond out loud. She looked at him carefully, trying to understand his tone. She wasn't distrustful, just observant. She always listened first, before reacting. The specialist continued in a gentle voice. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. You can respond however you like. Even silence is okay." She blinked slowly, showing she understood. Another specialist asked a simple question. "Do you feel comfortable right now?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she relaxed her shoulders slightly and placed her hands neatly on her lap. It was a small gesture, but the specialists recognized it as a sign of comfort. The conversation went on like this for a long time. They asked short, open-ended questions, questions not meant to pressure her, but to give her space. They asked about her favorite sounds, colors, or shapes. They asked if she liked mornings better than evenings. They asked if she preferred quiet spaces or busy ones. She didn't speak, but she responded in her own ways: small gestures, soft glances, the way she shifted her posture. She touched her fingers together when she liked a question. She tilted her head slightly when she was thinking. She blinked faster when she didn't understand something. It took the specialists less than 20 minutes to realize something important. She wasn't silent because she didn't understand. She was silent because she processed everything deeply before deciding whether to express it. Her mind moved in calm, layered ways. She understood tone, intention, and emotion better than most adults. She just communicated differently, more through observation and instinct than spoken words. Halfway through the session, they brought out soft objects: a small puzzle, a shape sorter, a stack of colored blocks. They placed them on the floor gently. She looked at the objects curiously. One specialist encouraged softly, "You can touch them. You can try anything you like." She hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but because she was thinking. Then she slowly reached for a small wooden block. She held it gently, as if testing its weight and texture. She looked at it from every angle, examining the surface carefully. Instead of stacking the blocks like most children would, she arranged them in a long curved line. She adjusted each block slightly, making sure the edges aligned evenly. She created a pattern so precise that the specialists exchanged quiet glances. She wasn't just playing, she was designing. When she finished the curve, she stepped back slightly, studying it as if analyzing the balance. Then she rearranged a few blocks, forming a gentle spiral instead. The pattern flowed naturally, like she had mapped it out mentally before touching a single piece. The specialists didn't interrupt her. They watched, fascinated, as she slowly built something that looked simple but carried clear intention. One specialist whispered, "She sees shapes the way musicians see sound." Another replied softly, "Or the way painters see light." After nearly an hour, they gently ended the session. They didn't want to overwhelm her with too much interaction at once. She stood up calmly when they signaled that the session was finished. She didn't cling to the objects or show any frustration about leaving them. She simply accepted that the time had ended. As they walked her back toward her room, she passed by a large window overlooking an inner courtyard. She stopped mid-step. Her eyes focused on something small outside, the movement of tree branches swaying in the wind. The guard paused beside her. He watched her expression soften. It wasn't the wind she was focusing on. It was the pattern of the shadows on the ground. The branches created shifting shapes as the sunlight passed through them. The movement was slow, gentle, rhythmic. She watched it like she was watching something familiar, something from long before she came to the facility. For a moment, the guard felt something unexpected. Not fear, not confusion, but empathy. He realized she wasn't just unusual, she was deeply aware of the world in a way most people had forgotten how to be. When she continued walking, she glanced once more at the shadows, as if taking the image with her. Later in the afternoon, the supervisors held a quiet meeting. They discussed everything: her calmness, her awareness, her silent way of communicating. They reviewed recordings from the morning session and noted how she chose patterns instinctively, how she interacted gently, how she never pushed or grabbed or acted impulsively. Someone finally said, "She isn't dangerous. She's thoughtful." Another added, "She challenges people without meaning to, not because she wants power, but because she sees more than we do." As they talked, one thing became clear. They had been trying to understand her through tests, but maybe, the whole time, she had been quietly trying to understand them. That evening, a soft dusk glow entered her room through the narrow window. She sat on the bed again, this time stretching her legs out and watching the small line of sunlight crawl slowly across the floor. She touched the light with her fingertips, following its movement gently. It was as if she was trying to learn the rhythm of the world, piece by piece, without ever asking for anything in return. For the first time, some of the staff felt a shift inside themselves. They no longer saw her as a mystery to solve. They saw her as a child trying to belong. And the facility, which once felt like a place of tests and observation, was beginning to feel something different, something softer, something warmer. She didn't speak a single word that day, but she changed. Everyone anyway. The final day in the facility began in a way no one expected. The sun had barely risen when a quiet message passed from one department to another. Today would not be a test day. There would be no sensors placed around the room, no specialists waiting behind glass panels, no new challenges or observations to collect. Instead, the supervisors had decided on something different, something gentler. They wanted to see how the girl behaved when the day was not structured for her. They wanted to see how she acted when she was simply allowed to exist. The girl woke early, as she always did. She sat up slowly, taking in the faint morning light filtering through the window. The soft colors of dawn seemed to fascinate her. She lifted her hand, letting the light touch her fingers. It made her smile faintly, one of the rare, soft smiles that only lasted a second. When the guard arrived, he didn't speak at first. He just watched her for a moment, then said calmly, "Today is a quiet day." She tilted her head, absorbing the meaning. Quiet day. No tests. No instructions. She blinked once, as if acknowledging it, then stood from the bed. They walked through the corridor at an unhurried pace. The air felt lighter than usual, as if the walls themselves had relaxed. Some staff members waved gently at her as she passed. She responded with a small nod, her eyes soft, her posture calm. The breakfast area was less crowded than usual. A few workers sat at distant tables. She chose a seat near the window, where sunlight touched the edge of the table. She ate slowly today, taking time to taste every bite. Sometimes she paused to watch dust particles float in the light, as if they were tiny stars moving in their own quiet universe. After breakfast, instead of being taken to the evaluation rooms, she was brought to the inner courtyard, the same place she had looked at through the window the day before. This time, she was allowed to step outside. The door slid open, and she stepped into the open air. Her breathing changed instantly. It wasn't dramatic, but the guard noticed it. She inhaled softly, like the air itself surprised her. The scent of trees, soil, and gentle wind seemed to settle inside her chest dot. The courtyard was a peaceful place, soft grass, a small stone path, a sitting area, and a few trees whose branches swayed gently. Birds sometimes visited the branches, though the facility was far from any forest. Today, 2 birds perched quietly on the highest branch, watching the girl with quiet curiosity. She walked forward slowly, her steps almost silent on the grass. She lowered herself onto the ground, sitting cross-legged. She placed her hands in her lap and looked up at the sunlight passing through the branches. The shifting shadows she had admired from her window were now right above her. She reached out her hand toward them, not to grasp them, but simply to feel the movement on her skin. The guard stood a small distance away, not intruding. He realized something quietly. This was the first time she truly looked like a child. Not a test subject, not a mystery, just a child sitting under a tree. A few minutes later, 2 staff members entered the courtyard, carrying something unexpected, a set of soft drawing materials. Paper, colorful pencils, and a small board for support. They placed them gently beside her and stepped back. She looked at the items, her expression thoughtful. She picked up a pencil and held it between her fingers, as if testing its texture. Then she touched the paper lightly with her fingertip, exploring its surface. After a moment, she began to draw. Her strokes were soft at first, small lines, tiny curves. The staff watched quietly, not wanting to disturb her rhythm. Over time, the lines grew longer and more confident. She wasn't drawing an object exactly. She wasn't drawing people or animals. She was drawing movement, curving lines that resembled flowing wind, shapes that echoed the pattern of the shadows above her, a spiral that reminded the staff of the block pattern she'd created the previous day. Her drawing wasn't perfect, but it carried a gentle beauty, like she was translating the quiet world inside her mind onto the paper. When she finished, she looked at the drawing thoughtfully, then placed it aside like a leaf she had picked up from the ground. The staff members exchanged a glance. One whispered, "She expresses herself better without words." The other nodded. "She understands the world through shape and balance." The morning passed slowly. She spent time walking around the courtyard, touching the bark of trees, feeling the texture of leaves, crouching to observe small,